Tasha scrolled through Reddit, her heart pounding as she read another chilling paranormal encounter. She always felt drawn to these stories, even though she tried to play it cool in front of her friends, pretending to be a skeptic. Little did she know she was about to have an experience that would shatter her skepticism forever. It all started at a friend's Halloween party. The air was thick with the smell of fake blood and cheap plastic decorations. Music blared, laughter echoed, and everyone was caught up in the festive spirit. As the night wore on, a group decided to break out a Ouija board. Tasha hesitated but reluctantly joined the circle. The air seemed to crackle with a strange energy as they placed their fingers lightly on the planchette. At first the questions were light-hearted and silly, filled with the kind of playful curiosity that only close friends can share. Who's secretly crushing on whom? They giggled and teased each other, the atmosphere light and carefree. What's the worst Halloween costume in the room? Laughter echoed as they pointed fingers and shared inside jokes. The planchette moved slowly at first, almost imperceptibly. But then it began to gain momentum as if guided by an unseen hand. Tasha couldn't help but feel a shiver run down her spine, a sense of unease creeping in. Then the questions took a darker turn, the mood shifting from playful to serious. Someone asked if there were any spirits present, their voice barely above a whisper. The planchette shot towards the word yes, almost as if it had been waiting for that very question. A wave of nervous laughter rippled through the group, but Tasha felt a cold dread settle in her stomach, a feeling she couldn't shake. "Ask it its name," someone whispered, their voice trembling with a mix of fear and curiosity. The planchette spelled out, "Mara," the letters forming slowly, deliberately. "Mara," one of her friends repeated. "Are you here to talk to us?" The question hung in the air, heavy with anticipation. The planchette moved again, stopping on the word Tasha, sending a chill through the room. A hush fell over the group, all eyes turning to Tasha, who sat frozen in her seat, unable to move or speak. Her heart was pounding in her chest, and a wave of dizziness washed over her, making her feel as if the room was spinning. "Tasha," the friend repeated, "Mara wants to talk to you. Do you have any questions for her?" Tasha wanted to scream, but the words seemed stuck in her throat. She felt a strange pressure on her chest, making it difficult to breathe. As if in a trance, Tasha found herself asking, "What do you want?" The planchette moved swiftly, spelling out, "You!" Tasha gasped, jerking her hand back from the planchette. "Leave her alone!" one of them shouted, slamming her hand down on the board. The planchette skidded to the word goodbye. Tasha, still trembling, stumbled to her feet, muttering an excuse about needing some fresh air. Outside, the cool night air did little to ease the fear that gripped her. The days following the party were a blur of unsettling events. Tasha couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Her sleep was plagued by nightmares, vivid and disturbing. Her friends brushed off Tasha's concerns, attributing her anxieties to her overactive imagination. But Tasha knew deep down that something wasn't right. The name Mara echoed in her mind, a constant whisper that sent chills down her spine. Objects would move around her apartment, seemingly of their own accord. She'd hear whispers in the dead of night, soft and indistinct. One particularly terrifying evening, she heard her name being called clear as day from the other room. Terrified, Tasha fled her apartment, seeking refuge in the brightly lit, crowded streets below. As the days turned into weeks, Tasha's condition worsened. The nightmares intensified, morphing into waking hallucinations. She started seeing shadowy figures lurking at the edge of her vision. Her appetite vanished, replaced by a constant, gnawing nausea. The whispers grew louder, more insistent. Her friends began to worry. One evening, while having dinner with her closest friends, Tasha had a particularly disturbing episode. She started speaking in a guttural, unknown language, her voice raspy and distorted. Her friends, horrified, could only watch as she thrashed in her seat. They feared she was having some sort of mental breakdown, but a part of them couldn't shake the feeling that something more sinister was at play. The hospital was a sterile, brightly lit place that smelled faintly of disinfectant and fear. The walls were a stark white and the floors gleamed under the harsh fluorescent lights. It was a place designed to heal, but it felt cold and unwelcoming. Doctors, their faces etched with concern, poked and prodded at Tasha, but their examinations yielded no answers. They ran test after test, each one more invasive than the last, but the results were always inconclusive. They attributed her episode to stress and exhaustion, recommending therapy and rest. They spoke in hushed tones, as if afraid that their words might shatter her fragile state. But Tasha knew, deep down, that there was more to it than that. She felt a gnawing sense of dread, an unshakable feeling that something was terribly wrong. The nightmares continued, even within the sterile confines of the hospital room. Each night they grew more vivid, more terrifying, as if they were trying to tell her something. She'd wake up screaming, her body drenched in sweat. Her heart would race and she'd feel an overwhelming sense of panic, as if she were being chased by something unseen. One night, as she lay in bed, she heard her name being whispered. It was a soft, almost inaudible sound, but it sent chills down her spine. It wasn't the nurses, it was Mara, her voice closer now, more insistent. The whispers grew louder, more urgent, as if Mara was trying to warn her about something. Tasha could feel a cold presence in the room, a darkness that seemed to seep from the very walls. It was as if the shadows themselves were alive, reaching out to her. Then she blacked out. When she came to, it was morning. A nurse was checking her vitals. The room was filled with the soft light of dawn, but it did little to dispel the lingering sense of unease. Tasha's blood ran cold. She had no memory of the night before, no recollection of speaking in any language. The nurse looked at her with a mixture of pity and concern, but Tasha could only think of the darkness and the voice that had called her name. The doctors, baffled by her condition, discharged her with a prescription for mild sedatives. They suggested she seek psychiatric help, implying that her problems were all in her head. Tasha wanted to believe them, longed for the comfort of a simple, rational explanation. But deep down she knew the truth was far more terrifying. She was haunted by something ancient and malevolent. Her friends, though supportive, were at a loss. They suggested meditation, aromatherapy, even a visit to a local priest. But nothing seemed to work. The entity, Mara, was always there, lurking just beneath the surface. The nightmares continued, more vivid and terrifying than ever. She was losing time with alarming frequency, entire hours vanishing into a black hole of missing memories. Her once cozy apartment became a prison, each shadow a potential hiding place for the entity that tormented her. She tried to find solace in the company of her friends, but even their presence couldn't fully dispel the fear that clung to her. She saw pity in their eyes, a mixture of concern and fear that only served to isolate her further. She consulted psychics and mediums, desperate for answers. Some dismissed her claims as delusions, products of an overactive imagination. Others confirmed her worst fears. She was dealing with something dark and powerful. One medium warned Tasha that the entity was feeding on her fear, growing stronger with each passing day. But how could she fight something she didn't understand? The antique shop was a dimly lit, dusty place, crammed floor to ceiling with strange and wonderful objects. Each item seemed to whisper secrets of the past, stories long forgotten but still lingering in the air. The air was thick with the smell of old wood and forgotten magic. It was as if the very essence of history had seeped into the walls, creating an atmosphere both enchanting and eerie. The proprietor, a wizened old man, listened to her story with an unsettling calmness. His eyes, though clouded with age, held a depth of understanding that made Tasha feel both comforted and unnerved. When she finished, he nodded slowly, his gaze lingering on the Ouija board clutched tightly in her hands. The board seemed to pulse with a life of its own, a silent testament to the otherworldly forces at play. "You've opened a door, child," he said, "and now something has come through." His voice was grave, each word weighted with the gravity of the situation. Whether it was invited or not is irrelevant. It's here now, and it won't leave easily. The entity, once summoned, clings to our world with a tenacity that defies reason. Tasha's heart sank. She'd hoped for some words of comfort, some reassurance that there was a way to undo what had been done. But the old man's words only confirmed her worst fears. Instead, she received confirmation of her worst fears. The weight of her actions pressed down on her, a heavy burden she wasn't sure she could bear. The old man offered a glimmer of hope. There are ways to sever the connection, to banish the entity back to where it came from. His words were a lifeline, a small beacon of light in the darkness. But they are dangerous, fraught with peril, and there's no guarantee of success. The path ahead was treacherous, filled with unknown dangers, but it was the only chance she had to set things right. Despite the risks, Tasha knew she had no other choice. She had to fight back, to reclaim her life from the clutches of the entity that held her captive. She spent weeks studying the ancient texts, memorizing the rituals, preparing herself for the daunting task ahead. The ritual itself was a blur of flickering candlelight, whispered incantations, and the overwhelming stench of incense. Tasha poured every ounce of her being into the ritual, her voice raw with desperation. As she uttered the final words, a wave of energy surged through the room, knocking her to her knees. Silence descended, heavy and absolute. The whispers were gone, the feeling of being watched had vanished. Her apartment, once a prison of fear, felt safe again. But even now, years later, a part of Tasha can't shake the feeling that she's not entirely free.